a length of cloth, the color of crushed grapes, unrolled across bare stone. It is laid down for one man to walk on, not a king returning from a festival. A king returning from a war fought to win back another man's wife and paid for, first, with his own daughter. Greetings, gods. You're in Catheoria now, and this shadow belongs to Clytemnestra. She is not the wife waiting at the door. She is the mother who has already done the arithmetic on what a war costs a family, and has been waiting 10 years for the bill to come due. This is not a story about one murder. It is a story about a family that kept calling revenge by the name of justice, until no one inside that house could tell the difference anymore. Not the father, not the mother, not the son who came after both of them. Before this house is a palace again. It is a dinner table where the meal is not food. A blade resting in water that has gone warm, waiting for someone to need it. A serpent fed at a breast that once fed someone else. A courtroom where the verdict exists before anyone has spoken a word in its defense. None of this has happened yet. All of it already has. This is how the house remembers the future in pieces. Out of order. The way you remember a wound before you remember how you got it. A man stands watch on a roof, and he has been standing there long enough to know the sky better than he knows his own house. 10 years before a hand closes around a blade. Another hand had already decided which child in this family would pay for a war she never chose. A year of nights. A man lying on his elbows on a palace roof, like a dog, too loyal to lie down properly. Watching for one particular fire among 10,000 ordinary stars. He has learned the names of constellations he never asked to learn, which ones bring winter, which ones bring summer, which lords of the sky rise, and which ones set, because there has been nothing else to do up here but wait and notice things. The way a person notices everything when there is nothing left to do but watch. He has also learned not to say what he notices about the house beneath him. There is a watchman's phrase for this. Older than any of the people currently living in this palace, an ox standing on the tongue, something large enough to crush whatever you were about to say. He has felt that animal's weight for 10 years, standing on this roof above a house that, if its stones could speak, would have a great deal to say and no intention of saying it. Tonight, when the fire he has been waiting for finally appears on the far ridge, not a star, but a flame moving the way no star moves. Deliberate. Signaling his first feeling is not joy. It is the sensation of a door somewhere in the house opening that has been shut for a very long time. And not all doors are good news simply because they finally move. He goes to wake the queen. This is the job. He does not yet know what he is waking. What he does not know, what the watchman on the roof cannot know. But what every wall of this palace seems to have known for 10 years is that the woman he is about to wake has not been sleeping. Not really. Not in the way a person sleeps when there is nothing left to count. There is a room in this palace where the name Iphigenia has not been spoken aloud in 10 years. Not because the household has forgotten how to say it, because saying it requires someone, eventually, to answer for what happened to the girl it belongs to. And there has never been a single day in this house when anyone was prepared to do that. A house can survive a very long time on the simple discipline of not saying one name. Servants learn it first. The way they learn which floors creak. Then it spreads to the children. Then, eventually, even the mother who lost the most learns to step around the hole in her own sentences without looking down. Because looking down too often is its own kind of drowning. That name was Iphigenia. There is a throne in this palace that was never, by any law of this land, supposed to belong to a woman. Clytemnestra has sat on it for 10 years anyway, settling disputes between farmers, deciding which ships sail and which stay docked, keeping a kingdom fed and armed and intact while every man old enough to fight was either dead at Troy or too old to have gone at all. She has done this well. She has done it so well that the only language available to describe how well she has done it is to say she ruled like a man, as though competence were a foreign coin that only counts once it has been stamped with someone else's face. There is a bed in this palace that stopped 10 years ago, being a place where a marriage happened. It became, instead, a place where a woman lay awake doing arithmetic. How many seasons since Aulis? How many more before a ship might finally appear on the horizon? How a person keeps a number like that from eating every other thought in her skull. Some nights, by her own later account, she would tell herself, this was grief settling into patience. Other nights she knew exactly what it actually was, a debt collector, lying very still, waiting for the only collateral that would ever satisfy the account. There is no grave in this story for Iphigenia that the city was ever allowed to visit. A funeral admits a death happened. A death that admits itself becomes a death someone has to answer for. And there was no version of this family in which her father was prepared to answer for anything. Not while there was still a war to win and a name to make. So the house did the next best thing available to it. It stopped saying her name, and it called the silence peace. This is the palace. The watchman wakes that night, a building that has spent a decade getting extremely good at silence. About to receive news that will end every single one of those silences at once. She comes out, already knowing, not guessing, not hoping, knowing, with the flat certainty of someone reciting a fact she settled on years before tonight. Troy has fallen. She does not ask for proof. She orders the altars lit across the entire city before a single confirmed report has reached her gates. And when the chorus of old men, the only men left in Argos, too old for the war, too slow for anything but watching question her, doubt her, suggest that a woman's heart leaps too easily at good news. She does not flinch. She answers them with the whole architecture of how the news travelled. Mountain to mountain. Fire passed from hand to hand across an entire stretch of sea and sky. Ida, where the flame was born. Across to the rock sacred to Hermes on Lemnos. Up to the heights of Athos. Sacred to Zeus, leaping the sea itself in its hurry to be believed, down through Makistos, where a watchman who did not fall asleep on his post passed it onward, over the river Eropos to Messapion, where they lit a pile of dried heather and sent it on, still strong, still undimmed, like a second moon, until it crossed the plain and reach the ridges where she stands now, telling this story to men who are not sure whether to trust her. It is an extraordinary speech, the kind of speech that should make a room go quiet with respect. The chorus leader's response is the kind of compliment that tells you more about the room than about the woman in it, spoken like a man. My lady. Not she is wise, not she sees clearly. Spoken like a man, as though clarity were a foreign language she had. For once, managed to translate correctly. For 10 years this woman has held a kingdom together with the same mind that just traced a flame across 6 mountain ranges without faltering. And the only language anyone around her has for that mind is the language of borrowing someone else's gender to explain it. She does not correct them. She has had 10 years to learn exactly which battles are worth her breath. And this is not one of them. The chorus, left alone after she withdraws, does not simply celebrate. They sing instead about the war they were too old to fight in, and about the woman whose face started it. They remember Helen leaving for Troy. And they remember what the prophet Calchas saw in the omens. Before the fleet ever set sail, 2 eagles tearing apart a pregnant hare. A sign the priest read as a warning that triumph at Troy would come at the cost of something young and unborn. They sing about a sickness in the house of Atreus that goes back further than this war, further than this marriage. A wrongdoing that breeds another wrongdoing, the way a single bad seed breeds an entire poisoned field. They are afraid, and they are not entirely sure of what. And that uncertainty is its own kind of honesty, an old chorus admitting that something about this homecoming does not sit right, long before any of them have the language to say exactly why. A herald arrives at the gates, dust thick on his sandals, an olive branch in his hand, weeping with relief at the simple fact of solid ground beneath him after 10 years of sand and sea. He tells the chorus everything they want to hear and several things they did not ask for. Troy has fallen. Agamemnon is alive, is close, is bringing the kind of victory poets will still be singing about, long after every man who fought for it is dust. And then, because he cannot help himself, because 10 years of suffering does not simply disappear the moment the suffering ends. He tells them what it actually cost to get here. Beds too close to the enemy's walls. Dew and frost soaking through cloth until the hair on their own bodies stood up like something wild. Summers so brutal the sea itself seemed to fall asleep without a single wave. Men who did not come home in their own shape, but folded into urns small enough to carry. Ash, standing in for the body a family will never get to bury whole. Wah, the herald says. Trades men for ash the way a merchant trades goods, weighing one against the other on a scale that never once asks whether the trade was fair. It is the closest this story comes, before the king himself ever appears, to admitting out loud what a war like this one actually does to the people who survive it and what it must have already done 10 years earlier, to the one person in this family who paid for it before a single ship ever left the harbour. What she does spend her own breath on, when Agamemnon finally rides into view, is something closer to the truth than the herald's report, though she dresses it carefully even then. For 10 years, she tells the assembled household, sitting alone in this house has been the worst kind of suffering a wife can know, the rumours arriving daily, each one worse than the last, each one a fresh way to imagine a husband dead. If every report of his wounds had been true, she says, his body would carry more scars than any net has holes. If every report of his death had been true, he would have died as many times over as a man with 3 separate bodies. She tells them she sent their young son Orestes away during the war, not out of cruelty, but out of fear for what an unguarded house with no king in it might invite. It is a strange, almost theatrical speech, true in every individual sentence. And it tells the chorus exactly nothing about the one death in this house she has not once mentioned tonight. Underneath all of it sits the story everyone in Argos already knows, and no one in this palace says out loud. 10 years ago, the fleet, bound for Troy, sat dead in the water at a port called Aulis, the wind refusing to move, day after day, until a prophet told Agamemnon why. The goddess Artemis was withholding the wind, and she would keep withholding it until the king gave her something he valued more than victory. Agamemnon sent for his daughter under the pretense of a wedding to the great Achilles. The girl came expecting a celebration. What waited for her at Aulis was an altar. The wind that finally filled the sails afterward did not come from a god rewarding a king for his piety. It came from a king allowing the war, the army waiting on him, and the name he had to protect to speak louder than the daughter already standing in front of him. And now, on the other side of the sea, the man responsible for all of it is coming home as a hero, not as a man who has spent 10 years owing something, as a man the entire Greek world is preparing to celebrate, because that is what victors get, regardless of what they paid to become one. There is an army behind him that does not ask whose daughter financed their fair winds. There is a code of honor among kings that has no room for the question Clytemnestra has been asking herself. Alone, for a decade, Agamemnon is not walking home through any private reckoning. He is walking home through the noise of 10,000 men telling him he was right to do what he did. Because the war was won, and wars that are won do not get relitigated by the men who fought them. He has had an army to drown out the one daughter he lost. She has had 10 years, an empty room, and a throne nobody quite believed she had the right to sit on, which she has sat on anyway, every single day. Because someone in this house had to. The chariot comes into view at last. The next thing that walks through these gates is not a homecoming. It is a debt finally arriving at the door of the only person in this house who has been counting the interest the whole time. Agamemnon steps down from the chariot, the way conquerors step down slow. Formal. Already half performing the role the army behind him expects to watch him play. His first words are not for his wife. They are for Argos itself, for the gods who carried him here, for the city he is returning to, as though it were a prize equal to the one he just took from Troy. He speaks of Odysseus, the one companion among all his men he can call loyal without hesitation. He speaks of an assembly he intends to build, a way of ruling that listens before it commands, of weeding out whatever corruption a decade of war may have let take root in his absence. He sounds, for these few sentences, like a king, genuinely trying to imagine what kind of ruler 10 years of war has left him capable of being a man who can still smell smoke from a burning city, clinging to his own clothes, and is, in this exact breath, already thinking about how to govern wisely now that the smoke has cleared. The chorus, listening, does not simply celebrate alongside him. Even now, watching their king finally stand on Argive soil again. Some old worry will not let them rest easy. They sing, almost to themselves, about how prosperity left unchecked breeds its own kind of sickness. How a house built too high eventually invites the very envy it should have feared. How wrongdoing in one generation has a way of fathering more wrongdoing in the next. The way a single corrupted seed poisons an entire field that comes after it. They do not say what exactly they are afraid of. They only know that something about this homecoming, however joyful it looks from the outside, does not sit entirely right in their chests. Clytemnestra meets him at the gates herself. There is no rush in her. 10 years has taught her exactly how to stand still. Her welcome, when it comes, is enormous longer than anything a simple homecoming requires. Every sentence stacked carefully on the one before it. She calls him the watchdog of the house, the saving rope thrown to a ship in trouble, the only pillar holding up a roof that would otherwise have collapsed years ago. She tells the chorus, in front of him, exactly how unbearable the waiting was, how every fresh rumor of his death arrived like a new wound before the last one had even closed. How she had, more than once, felt grief become something she was not sure she could survive. She tells them she sent their son Orestes to live with allies far from Argos, not from any failure of love, but because a house without its king is a house that invites exactly the kind of trouble she could not risk facing alone. Every sentence in that speech is built out of true material. None of it is the whole truth. A person can construct an entire address out of individually honest pieces and still be lying about everything that matters. And when she lifts her eyes to him directly for the first time since he stepped off the ship, there is a half second where something almost surfaces in her face. Not at him, exactly, but through him, toward a girl who is not standing anywhere in this courtyard and never will again. He does not see it. He has spent 10 years learning how not to look for it. Then she gives the order. Bring out the cloth. Servants move quickly, unrolling a deep red fabric edged in purple across the bare stone between the chariot and the doors die-pulled. Dozens of shells at a time, from the bottom of the sea. The kind of color that exists nowhere else in nature, this rich, this expensive, this clearly meant for something other than a man's feet. Agamemnon hesitates, and to his credit, he understands exactly what is being offered to him and exactly why it should make him uneasy. Such honors belong to gods. He tells her he does not want to be praised the way a woman might fuss over a returning husband, nor grovelled before the way some foreign court might fawn over its ruler. Pampering breeds envy, he says, and envy is the one thing a man returning from 10 years of war cannot afford to attract. To set his own foot, a foot that walked through the ashes of an entire city, onto cloth this fine feels. To him, like reaching for something that was never his to reach for. Clytemnestra does not argue with his caution directly. She turns it, instead, into a question he cannot easily answer without admitting something about himself. If Priam had won, she asks him, what do you imagine he would have done? It is not really a question. It is a mirror, angled precisely enough to catch the one thing Agamemnon cannot afford to consider seriously, that the defeated king of Troy, given the same victory, would not have hesitated for even a moment to take what glory offered him, to refuse the cloth. In this light, starts to look less like humility and more like fear. And a man who has just spent a decade proving his courage to an entire army does not want to be the one who flinches now, in front of his own gates, over a piece of dyed fabric. His mistake here is not ignorance. He understood the trap clearly enough to name it himself a moment earlier. It is that, given the choice between admitting fear and taking the glory waiting just past it, he finds he would rather take the glory. He gives in. Let it be done. Then, he tells her, since you have set your will against mine in this, and he tells her, before he crosses it, to receive the foreign girl travelling with him kindly, the gift his army gave him from the spoils of war, the finest flower taken from everything Troy had left to offer. It is the only gentle instruction he gives in this entire homecoming, and he gives it to a woman he has never met, walking past the wife who has run his kingdom alone for a decade without once asking what she might need from him in return. He steps onto the cloth. This is the second time in this story that someone's competence will be praised in a way that should worry them more than it flatters them. The chorus called her clarity masculine. Agamemnon is about to call her persuasion an act of love. He does not understand. Crossing that purple path toward his own front door. That the last time this family stood near an altar, deciding what was worth more than what. He was the one holding the blade, and she has had 10 years to decide exactly how this particular crossing would end. She walks beside him as far as the threshold, speaking now of the sea itself, of how its dye renews forever, of how this house, by the grace of the gods, has never once known poverty, of robes she would have happily sacrificed by the hundreds if it meant ransoming his life from danger while he was still at Troy. It sounds, on the surface, like a wife overflowing with relief. It is also, underneath, the last thing he hears from her before the doors close. And not one word of it mentions the daughter whose name this house has spent 10 years refusing to say. The doors do not slam, they simply close. The way a door closes on a room nobody plans on opening again soon. Outside, in the chariot that carried the king's spoils of war, a woman sits without moving. Her name is Cassandra, daughter of the fallen king of Troy. And she has been given to Agamemnon the way armor and gold are given to a victor, a possession, a proof of conquest, a body the war has decided no longer belongs to itself. For a long moment, nothing happens at all. The doors stay shut. No sound comes from inside the house. The chorus stands in the courtyard the way men stand when a ceremony has technically ended, but no one has told their bodies to relax yet. Glancing at the chariot, glancing at the closed doors, unsure which discomfort to address first. Cassandra does not move. She has not moved since the chariot stopped. The air outside the palace has the particular stillness of a place where something large has just been swallowed and the house has not yet finished digesting it. Not violence. Not yet. Just the quiet of a trap that has already done the difficult part of closing. It is into this stillness that Clytemnestra eventually reappears. She does not know what to do with Cassandra's continued silence any better than the chorus does. She wonders aloud whether the foreign girl even understands their language. The way you might wonder about an animal that has not yet been trained to a new household. Then her patience runs out. There is no time. She tells the girl, directly, to stand outside wasting words on this woman, and if the foreigner cannot understand, let her make some sign with her foreign hand. Barbarian is the word she reaches for, not because she is cruel by nature, because she has spent a decade learning exactly how much room there is in her own grief for someone else's. And the answer, in this exact moment, is none. This is the part of the story that does not get told as often as the carpet, or the bath, or the axe. A woman who has spent 10 years being denied the right to grieve in public is, in this exact breath, denying another woman the right to be seen at all. Her grief explains the coldness. It does not absolve it. When Clytemnestra goes back inside, Cassandra is left with the chorus, the cooling air, and the thing she has carried since the god Apollo first cursed her a gift of true sight that nobody will ever believe. She begins to speak. At first it is only grief, formless, calling out to Apollo by name, asking why he has dragged her to this particular house out of every place in the world he could have ruined her in. Then the grief sharpens into vision, arriving in waves, each one clearer and more frightening than the last. In the first wave, she sees the house itself, not as it stands now, freshly decorated for a homecoming, but as it has always been, underneath every coat of paint anyone has ever given it. A house the gods despise. A house that has tasted its own children before, generations ago, at a banquet built entirely on lies. She sees the ghosts of those children seated at that same table. The old crime still clinging to it like a smell, no amount of washing has ever been able to remove. The chorus does not understand. They ask who? They ask when. The way men have always asked women in pain to first organize their suffering into something convenient before they will consider believing it. In the second wave, she sees a net, not metaphor net, real and waiting, woven into something soft enough to look like hospitality, strong enough to hold a man still while a blade finds him in his bath. She sees a hand raised, sees it fall, sees it raised again. The rhythm of something being finished with total, practiced care. She names what is coming as plainly as the visions allow her to a woman, a lioness who shares a bed with a wolf. Will be the death of a man and of her, the captive standing at this very gate, dragged into the same fate without ever having chosen any part of this story for herself. The chorus catches the shape of a threat and immediately assumes a man's hand must be behind it, because that is the only shape violence has ever been allowed to take in their imagination. They cannot conceive of the queen herself as the blade. Cassandra is not vague. They are simply unwilling to finish the sentence she has already started. In the third wave, the vision turns inward, toward herself, and something in her voice changes. There is a moment, small, almost unbearable, where Cassandra stops being a woman, screaming about the future, and becomes, for just a breath, a woman who has already made peace with not being believed. Everyone she loved is dead. She says, the city that was her whole life ended in fire while she watched it burn from a hillside with no way to stop it. It is, she says, time to join them. The chorus, awkward, offers her the only comfort they have left, that a noble death is, at least, a blessing. She does not argue. She has run out of energy to correct people who think dying with dignity is a consolation prize for dying unheard. She walks toward the doors of the palace. At the threshold, she stops, recoiling, as though the air itself has changed. The house, she says, breathes like a slaughterhouse. The chorus tries to explain it away, sacrificial smoke. Nothing more. The ordinary scent of a homecoming feast. She knows better. She has smelled this exact air before, in a city that no longer exists. Before she goes in, she asks the chorus for one thing, which is not rescue. It is memory. Bear witness later. She says that a woman died for a woman, and a man fell for a man, not his equal meaning herself, traded for nothing she chose, and meaning Agamemnon, brought down not by an enemy worthy of him in battle, but by hands inside his own house. Cassandra saw the curse that lived inside this house before she ever set foot in it. Clytemnestra has been living inside that same curse for 10 years. Long enough to learn how to call it justice, and long enough, apparently, to walk past a stranger's terror without breaking her stride, on her way to settle a debt that has nothing to do with the woman she just dismissed at the gate. The doors close on Cassandra the same way they closed on Agamemnon. What happens inside does not need to be seen, to be understood. A blade was never meant to be witnessed directly to do its work. It only needs a body to find. And Aeschylus, writing this 25 centuries ago, knew enough to let an audience hear it rather than watch it. A king's voice, cut off, mid-syllable, then nothing, then, a long moment later, the doors opening on their own and a woman standing in them, calm, unhurried, with the look of someone who has just finished a piece of work she planned a very long time ago. She does not deny anything. She does not run. She tells the chorus exactly what she did and exactly why. In the unhurried voice of someone reciting a verdict, she reached years before anyone else in the room knew there was a trial happening. She tells them how she trapped him in a robe woven wide enough to make any escape impossible, and how she kept going until the work she had planned for 10 years was finished. She compares her plan to a fisherman's net, cast wide enough that nothing inside it could find a way out. She says she feels no shame. She says this is justice for a daughter. No one else in this city ever properly mourned a debt that has finally been paid in the only currency this family seems to understand. She does not mention Cassandra by name in her justification. This is worth sitting with for one more second before the story moves on, because it is the entire shape of this family compressed into a single absence. A woman builds an argument for justice powerful enough to survive 25 centuries of retelling. And inside that argument, there is no room left over for the other woman that she killed on the same afternoon, for reasons that had nothing to do with Iphigenia at all. The chorus recoils from her, calling what she has done monstrous, telling her the city will turn against her, that exile or worse waits for a woman who kills her king. She does not back down from a single word of it. She tells them plainly that she does not fear their threats the way they imagine she should, that if Zeus himself sent a darker fate to follow this one, she would accept it the same way she accepted everything else that brought her to this exact morning. A new voice enters the scene now, a man named Aeschylus, arriving only after the killing is finished. Never having lifted a hand himself, he announces, almost proudly, that this death settles an old account. His father Thyestes was tricked decades ago by Agamemnon's father into eating his own murdered sons at a banquet meant to look like reconciliation. A horror so total that Thyestes did not even know what he had eaten until the meal was already finished inside him. Aeschylus has spent his life carrying that horror, the way a person carries a scar they were born with rather than one they earned. He did not invent the cruelty in this family. He is only the latest person it taught to want revenge. He is not the reason Clytemnestra killed her husband. He is proof that this house had been teaching its children the grammar of revenge long before she ever married into it. The chorus, furious, threatens him with the city's judgment, calling him a coward who let a woman do a man's work while he hid in the shadows planning it, telling him plainly that he will pay for this the moment Orestes returns. If fortune allows the boy to come home at all, Aeschylus does not take the insult quietly. He calls for his own guards, men he has clearly kept ready for exactly this kind of confrontation, and threatens chains and starvation for any old man foolish enough to keep talking now that the throne is his to defend. For a moment, the courtyard tips toward open violence, old men with nothing left to lose, squaring off against armed soldiers, loyal to a king who has not yet ruled for a single full day. It is Clytemnestra, not Aeschylus, who steps between them and calls for peace. Enough. She tells both sides. There has been enough suffering in this house already, without adding one more wound to everything it is already carrying. Let us be content with what has been done. She says, terrible as it was, and let it be enough. The chorus backs down, but before they go, they say one thing. The queen does not contradict, because she cannot when Orestes returns. He will avenge his father. She does not flinch at the warning. She has had 10 years to learn how to not flinch at things that are still, technically, in the future. Years pass in this house. The story does not slow down to tell you what they were like. And that silence is its own kind of answer. A reign built on a killing behind closed doors does not get a peaceful stretch of years. It gets a long, watchful one. Clytemnestra rules, beside Aegisthus. But the throne under her has never stopped being hers. What has changed? In these years since, is what kind of woman the house has made her into. Less performance, less need to translate her own competence into a man's compliment. More silence of a different kind, not the silence over a daughter's name, but the silence of someone who has started to wonder whether the debt she settled actually closed the account, or simply moved the balance to someone else's name. Inside that same house, a daughter who never left has been carrying a very different kind of silence. Electra was a girl when her father sailed for Troy, and a young woman by the time his long-awaited homecoming became another death. This house refused to let her mourn properly. She has spent all the years since watching her mother and her mother's lover sit at the same table where her father once sat, sleep in halls her father once ruled, and she has had to perform, daily, the particular discipline of looking at the woman who gave her life without letting her face show what she actually feels about it. Then come the dreams. Clytemnestra dreams she has given birth to a snake. In the dream, she does what any mother would do. She wraps it. She warms it. She offers it her own breast. The snake bites down. Milk and blood come together in her mouth. She wakes, screaming. In a house lit suddenly by every lamp the servants can find, and sends Electra and a group of slave women out to her dead husband's grave the next morning, hoping that whatever this dream is warning her about can be appeased before it arrives. The story does not tell us whether this is guilt or fear. It may be both. It may be a woman who has spent years being certain, finally meeting a feeling she does not have a ready answer for. The women sent to perform this errand do not go gently. They walk to the tomb already hating the woman who sent them, marking their faces in mourning, calling her out loud, where anyone might hear a godless woman undeserving of the rites she is asking them to perform on her behalf. Electra arrives at her father's grave, uncertain how to even begin the prayer Clytemnestra has assigned her. Should she pour the wine with love, as a daughter pouring for a father she misses? Or should she pour it the way her mother actually deserves bitterly, as an offering owed only because someone in this house has to keep the dead from turning their anger on the living? The women around her tell her plainly what to pray for, instead, not comfort for the household, but a man or a spirit who will come and kill the killers in turn. Electra kneels at the grave and asks for exactly that, in words that reveal far more about her than any of her mother's speeches ever revealed about hers. She asks the gods to send her brother home. She asks for herself something her mother, in her eyes, has never once had discretion. The simple, ordinary self-restraint to not let love and fury collapse into the same gesture. She asks that her own hands stay clean in whatever comes next, even as she is, in this very breath, praying for someone else's death. She is not a girl asking for vengeance the way a sword asks to be drawn. She is asking, almost desperately, to be different from the mother she is about to help destroy. Far away, A young man has been living a life that was never fully his own to choose. Orestes was sent from this house as a child, the year his father died, hidden among allies in another kingdom for his own safety. He does not remember the woman who sent him away. What he has, instead, is a lifetime of other people's sentences about her. A mother who killed a king. A mother who took a lover. A mother who is spoken of in every story he has ever been told as something closer to a crime than a person. No one who raised him in exile ever sat him down and told him what her voice sounded like, or what her hands felt like, or whether she ever once, in some year too early for him to remember, held him the ordinary way. Mothers hold children before any of this began. He is coming home now, carrying a command from the god Apollo. Avenge your father. He has lived far from this house, long enough for his mother to become a story before she ever became a face. He travels with one companion who has stayed at his side through all of it. A man named Pylades. Pylades has not said a single word in this story. He only stays close, close enough that when Orestes finally needs another voice, it will already be beside him. At his father's grave, Orestes leaves 2 locks of his own hair, one in tribute to the river that watched over his childhood, one for the father he barely had time to know before the man sailed off to a war and never fully returned. Not really, not as anything other than a body to be avenged. He hides himself when he sees a group of women in mourning robes approaching the same grave. And among them, he recognizes someone his sister. Electra stayed with the wound Orestes only inherits now from a distance. That is the difference between them. He comes home carrying a command. She has been living all these years inside the room where the command was born, watching that same woman pour wine at the same table and grow older in the rooms. Electra still could not stop thinking of as her father's. If Orestes see Clytemnestra as a verdict, Electra has had all this time to also see her as a woman who still, infuriatingly, sometimes looks like someone's mother, which is exactly the discretion she prayed, only minutes ago, that she might somehow be allowed to keep even now. The 2 of them meet over their father's grave and recognize each other through small, almost domestic proof, a lock of hair that matches his, a footprint in the dirt that matches hers. It is a strange, quiet reunion for 2 people about to plan a murder together. There is real love in it. There is also a terrible practicality, the kind that only exists in families that have learned to grieve and plot in the same breath. Brother, sister, and the slave women around them fall into a long, mournful song together, calling out to their dead father as though he might still be listening from beneath the very ground they are standing on. They remind him of everything that has been taken his throne, his honor, his children's inheritance, the proper funeral he was never given. Electra reminds him that he was buried without the city's grief, the same way her sister was once denied any death right at all. Orestes asks his father's spirit for the power to reclaim what is his. Electra asks only that something of this family survive past whatever comes next. It is grief and strategy sung in the same breath. Orestes asks why his mother sent offerings to a grave she has spent years pretending does not concern her. They learn of the dream, the serpent, the milk, the blood, and Orestes, hearing it, understands something the dream itself seems to have already decided, long before he arrived, to interpret it. He says he will be the serpent, if the dream came from the same place he did, swaddled the way he was swaddled, reaching for the same breast that once fed him, only to answer that nourishment with violence, then the dream is not a warning to be avoided. It is an instruction already written. His mother, he says, raised something dangerous inside her own body without knowing it. And now that danger has a name, and the name is hers to answer for. He says this with the confidence of a man who has not yet stood in the same room as the woman. He is describing a confidence that costs nothing yet, because the only mother he has ever had to reckon with so far is the one assembled for him out of other people's grief and other people's certainty. The real one is still just a doorway, not yet a face, not yet a voice, not yet anything that can complicate the sentence he has just finished pronouncing. Orestes came home carrying a father. The house he is walking into still has a mother standing inside it. And a mother is a far harder thing to carry a sentence against than an idea of one. The plan is simple, almost domestic in its deception. Orestes and Pylades arrive at the palace gates disguised as ordinary travelers from a distant region, carrying false news for the household. Orestes is dead. Clytemnestra comes out to receive them herself, offering the hospitality due to any traveler, asking to hear the report in full. The disguised Orestes tells her, in careful detail, of a young man who died far from home, his ashes already prepared for the journey back. She listens to the entire account of her own son's death without anyone in the room, not the chorus, not the audience watching 25 centuries later, ever getting a clear answer to the one question that matters most. Does she grieve? What we are told instead comes from someone else entirely. A few minutes later, in a scene this story did not strictly need, but chose to include anyway, Clytemnestra sends for Aeschylus, and the woman she sends to fetch him is Celyssa, the old nurse who raised Orestes from his first days of life, the one who washed him, fed him, paced the floor with him through every long night an infant refuses to sleep. Celyssa comes out of the palace in tears, and she cannot hold back what she has just watched happen in front of her. Her mistress, she tells the chorus, put on a face of grief in front of the servants, the correct expression, properly arranged while behind that face. Celyssa says, her eyes were laughing at how fortunate this news actually was for her. It is possible. Celyssa is exactly right. She has known this house longer than almost anyone left in it. And a woman who has spent her whole life watching faces for a living does not usually mistake what she sees. But it is also possible something worse than simple cruelty is happening behind that face. A woman who has lived so long by calculation that grief itself has learned to arrive on her like a mask, even when some part of what is underneath it might be real. The story does not resolve this for us. It only gives us Celyssa's eyes, and what she says she found there. Celyssa is the only person in this house who grieves Orestes without needing his death to mean anything. That is why the scene matters, and why it hurts when even her grief is turned into a tactic. The chorus, listening, asks her one practical question, buried inside her sorrow. Did her mistress also instruct that Aeschylus bring his armed guard with him to question these strangers? Celyssa says yes. Those were her exact instructions. The chorus tells her, gently, to leave that part out when she delivers the message, to let Aeschylus believe he can come alone. Celyssa does not know what she is helping arrange. She only knows her own grief is real, and that the rest of this house has decided, once again, to use even that grief as one more piece on the board. Aeschylus arrives without his guards, just as the chorus intended, confident, dismissive even, wondering aloud whether this news is reliable or just another rumor spread by frightened women. He goes inside to question the travelers himself. He does not come back out. What happens to him is fast. The story does not slow down for Aegisthus's death the way it slowed down for Cassandra's terror or Agamemnon's homecoming. And that speed is its own verdict. Years of waiting compressed into a death scene that barely earns a breath of narration. Because his death is not the center of this story. It never was. A servant rushes out, calling for Clytemnestra. Calling for the weapon a queen keeps near for exactly this kind of emergency. Before it can be brought to her, the doors open on their own. And standing where Aegisthus's body has just fallen is a young man she does not recognize, and a man she does. This is the moment the entire story has been walking toward, without ever announcing it directly. Not a battlefield, not a courtroom, a doorway. In the home she has ruled for years. With the body of one man already at her feet, and her own son standing in front of her, holding the same kind of resolve she once held, standing over a different body. In this exact house, long before. Two questions have been sitting underneath this story since the moment Orestes crossed back into Argos. And this is the doorway where both of them finally have to be answered. Whether anyone is ready or not, does Orestes remember his mother at all? Or only the story other people told him about her? And if the woman who once gave you life is also the woman who took someone else's, what name is a son even supposed to use for her in the same breath? She understands immediately who this stranger is. Before he can announce anything, before the disguise has any time left to matter, she sees her son's face arrive inside the shape of an executioner. And for one breath, she does the only thing left available to a mother in that position. She reaches for the truth of her own body. She does not present herself as a temptation. She presents herself as an origin. One hand moves to the fabric over her chest, not to reveal anything, only to mark the place. The way you might place your hand over your own heart to make a point you cannot otherwise put into words. Wait, my son, she says, have you no feeling left for this? For the body that held you while you slept? Drowsy and gumming softly at the milk that made you grow strong. It is not a seduction. It is a memory, offered as evidence, in the last court that will ever consider her case before the actual one begins. For the first time in this entire story, the command Orestes carries meets the body that actually fed him. And the command does not win immediately. It simply stops moving. Orestes does not move either. The word mother, a word he has spent his whole life hearing only as the name attached to a crime, never as something that once meant safety, warmth. The simple fact of being kept alive by a body that wanted him to live, that word comes very close to returning to him whole. He hears it. For a moment, something in him understands it. The way you understand a language you were never taught, but somehow still recognize in your own mouth. And for one more moment after that, some part of him wants, very badly, to be told by someone else that he does not have to be the one who decides what happens next. He turns to the one person who has stood beside him through every step of this and asks the only question he has left Pylades. What should I do? Pylades has not spoken once in this entire story. He speaks now, and he says only this, what then becomes of Apollo's oracles, declared at Delphi, and the sworn pact between us. If you turn back now, better to be hated by every person alive than to be hated by the gods. It is one sentence. It does not argue with the woman standing in front of them. does not address her at all. It simply hands Orestes a different language to stand inside one where the body in front of him is not a mother, but an obligation, where mercy is reframed as betrayal of something larger than the two of them. Orestes takes the language gratefully, the way a drowning man takes anything offered to his hand. And the word mother, which had almost returned whole, recedes again into the older word. He arrived, carrying debt. This is not a man turning into a weapon. A weapon does not hear the word mother, almost mean something again and then choose, with his own mouth still capable of saying otherwise. To let someone else's sentence finish the thought for him. He had the door open for one breath. He is the one who walked back through it himself. He tells her, coldly now, that she will lie beside the man she chose over his father. Since she loved Aegisthus and hated the husband she was bound to, she warns him, one last time, to beware the hounds of a mother's wrath that follow anyone who spills her blood. He answers that he has more to fear from his father's curse if he turns back now than from anything she can summon against him. She tells him plainly that she fears she is mourning into a deaf tomb, wasting her grief on someone already past hearing it. He tells her that her own husband's fate is deciding hers now, not him, that he is only the hand carrying out what she set in motion the day she chose a blade over a homecoming. The doors close on this conversation the way they closed on Agamemnon's, the way they closed on Cassandra's, the story refusing, every single time, to let an audience watch the final act directly. What we are given instead is the aftermath, silence. Then her voice once more, briefly, recognizing at last exactly what the dream of the serpent had been trying to tell her for weeks. I gave birth to this, she says. I fed it. I kept it alive. Then nothing. Almost immediately, something changes in the sun standing over her. He begins to see shapes at the edge of the room that no one else can see women. Dark-robed, their hair writhing like something alive, gathering closer the longer he looks at them. He insists they are real. Not vision, not grief playing tricks on an exhausted mind, the way the chorus around him keeps suggesting. He says he can feel them circling, the way a man feels a fever circling before it actually breaks. The chorus sees nothing where he is looking and tries to calm him. But Orestes is already backing toward the door, already running, chased by something his own act has summoned into the world, whether anyone else can witness it or not. The Furies have found him. A priestess at Delphi opens the doors of Apollo's temple in the grey light of early morning. The same ritual she has performed countless mornings before this one. She does not finish her prayer. Something inside the inner sanctuary makes her stagger back out, shaking, barely able to stand. What she has seen, she manages to explain, is a man seated at the very center of the temple, hands marked by what he has done. A sword in one fist and an olive branch, the universal sign of someone begging for sanctuary clutched in the other. Around him, asleep, are creatures she has no good word for. Not women exactly, not gorgons exactly, something older than either, with snakes coiled in their hair and a presence in the room that no incense in this holy place has ever had to compete with before. They are not beautiful, they are not gentle, but they are not meaningless either. They are the old debt of this house, finally walking on its own feet. The man is Orestes. He has run as far as Apollo's own temple. The god who gave the order, he is now being hunted for obeying. Inside the sanctuary, exhausted, he finds the Furies have finally caught up with him and finally, briefly, fallen asleep around him. Worn down by months of chasing a man across every road and sea between Argos and here, Apollo stands over him while they sleep. He has not abandoned the man whose hand he steered. And he says so plainly, "I will never fail you, because I am the one responsible for what your hand did." It is one of the only fully honest sentences a god offers in this entire trial, and it is worth noticing that Apollo is not being cowardly here. That is what makes him harder to simply dismiss. He does not run from the order he gave. He stands beside the man he commanded, and then sets out, with everything at his disposal, to build a world where that command no longer has to look like the crime it plainly was. He tells Orestes that the Furies are creatures from the deepest places under the earth, despised by gods and mortals alike, and that they will hunt him across every road he travels until he reaches one particular city. Go to Athens, he says. Find Athena's ancient image. Take hold of it and do not let go. There, finally, a resolution will be found, one that even Apollo himself does not have the power to grant alone. Orestes leaves with Hermes as his guide. The Furies remain asleep, and Apollo withdraws back into his inner sanctuary, leaving the sleeping goddesses alone on the stage for a moment that does not belong to any living character at all. What happens next belongs only to this story, in this version, and to no other moment in the entire trilogy, a single scene that exists nowhere else than here. Between two deaths and one trial, the ghost of Clytemnestra rises in the empty sanctuary, and she does the only thing left to a dead woman, whose case no one living seems interested in arguing. She wakes the goddesses who are supposed to be avenging her. "You sleep," she says, "and what use is a guardian who sleeps? It is because of you that I wander disgraced among the dead, unable to hold my head up among the other shades, accused on every side of the worst crimes imaginable, while the one I actually suffered being killed by my own child's hand draws no anger from a single power anywhere. I gave you offerings while I lived. I poured libations meant for exactly this purpose, to keep you ready, to keep you loyal. And you sleep through the one night your loyalty is finally needed." It is a strange, furious, almost pitiable scene. A woman who once stood over two bodies without flinching, now reduced to shaking, sleeping deities, awake because even in death, she cannot trust anyone else to remember her case correctly unless she stands over them herself and insists. She does not get a grave anyone visits. She does not get a funeral procession through Argos, the way her own daughter never did. What she gets, in the end, is one furious speech to an audience that was already supposed to be on her side and somehow still needed waking. The Furies stir, slow at first. Then, all at once, ashamed of having slept on the job, they sniff the air like hounds that have lost a scent, crying out when they realize Orestes is already too far ahead of them, already on the road, already protected by the very god they came here to punish for protecting him. They turn on Apollo directly when he reappears, accusing him of dishonoring them, of sheltering a polluted man inside his own sacred house. "This is your doing." They tell him, "You are the one who commanded the sun to spill his mother's blood, and the guilt for that belongs as much to you as it does to him." Apollo orders them out of his temple, calling their very shape unfit for a house this sacred. Neither side backs down from the other. They follow Orestes anyway, all the way to Athens. The same way hunting dogs follow a wounded animal by scent long after the animal itself has gone still with exhaustion. When they arrive, Orestes is kneeling at the foot of Athena's statue, hands worn thin from months of purification rituals meant to wash away the blood. Waiting, the Furies surround him like hunting dogs that have finally cornered something they have chased for half a year. We will take from you everything your act owes. They tell him they are not, in this telling, simple monsters enjoying cruelty for its own sake. They are the only beings left in this entire story who still insist. Out loud, on calling Clytemnestra by the one word, every court in this trial is quietly working to avoid mother. Not victim, not case. Mother, whatever else they are. They are also the last grief in this house that refuses to be translated into something more convenient to hear. Athena appears and asks them, calmly, who they are and what they want. They tell her plainly justice for a mother. Against a son. Athena does something this story has not done anywhere else in its telling. She does not simply punish or pardon. She builds an institution. She calls for citizens to gather and judge the case. Ordinary people of Athens. Not gods. Not furies. Not kings. And declares that from this day forward, this is how such cases will be settled. Not by a mother's curse chasing a son across the world. Not by an endless private accounting between families. By a court. And a vote. A herald's trumpet calls the city to order. Citizens gather to watch. The trial itself does not look like grief. It looks like law. The Furies open the prosecution, asking Orestes directly whether he killed his mother. He says yes, and that he has no regret, because he believes his father will help him from beyond death the way a father should. The Furies ask why. Then, did no one pursue Clytemnestra in this same way for killing Agamemnon? Orestes answers that Agamemnon was not, by their argument, of the same blood as the woman who killed him, only a husband. Not kin in the way a mother is kin to a son. The Furies, unconvinced, remind him that he is, by his own admission, marked by the very blood he is trying to argue, does not count the same as his father's. Apollo steps in to make the case stronger. And what he says next is the kind of argument this story has been building toward since the opening image of a man stepping onto a cloth he was warned not to walk on. The one who mounts the act of generation, Apollo argues, is the true parent. The mother is something closer to a stranger who agrees to preserve a stranger's seed, nurturing what was never hers to begin with, the way soil nurtures a seed it did not produce. A father, he insists, can exist without a mother entirely, and he offers Athena herself as the living proof. Standing in this exact courtroom, never carried in any womb, never fostered in any darkness, born whole from her father's own body. If a goddess can be entirely her father's, he reasons, then surely a mortal child can be too. And the blood spilled in killing such a child's mother is not, by this measure, blood owed to her at all. In that one sentence, a debt no one has fully spoken aloud. Since the opening of this story, a daughter sacrificed at Aulis. A war paid for with a girl. No one mourned properly, disappears completely from the conversation. In that room, the mother's blood does not actually disappear. It is simply asked to stand behind the father's, the way it has been asked to stand behind something else. Again and again. Since the very first scene of this story, The Furies do not back down easily. They remind everyone present that Zeus himself overthrew his own father to take power, if violence against a father is truly the worst crime imaginable. Why does the king of all gods owe his throne to exactly that crime? Apollo answers, that a god who is bound can always be freed again. A man who is dead stays dead. The comparison does not hold. He says, and moves on, promising Athena and her city greatness in exchange for a ruling in his favor, a political promise dressed in sacred language, offered openly in front of the entire court, as though everyone present already understood that this is simply how such decisions actually get made. The Furies hear the bribe land and do not bother hiding their disgust at it. They tell Athena plainly that if her court lets this man go free, the very ground he walks on will learn to despise him, that no law passed by mortals or gods can fully erase the debt a mother's blood leaves behind. It is the closest thing to a warning anyone offers in this entire trial. And it goes, like every other warning in this story, mostly unheeded by the people with the power to act on it. Athena tells the gathered citizens that the moment has come to decide, according to their own conscience, with no further argument left to weigh, but before the count is even taken. She announces the rule she intends to govern it by. I will add my own voice to this, she says, and if the count comes back equal, that equality is what frees him. I have no mother who gave birth to me, she tells the court, by way of explaining her vote. I side with the masculine in nearly everything, except marriage to it. I am, in every way that matters here. My fathers, the pebbles are counted, the numbers come back equal. By the rule, Athena herself set down. Orestes is free. Her vote is not neutral. No one watching needs to pretend it was. And yet the court she has just built is not fake. Either. A system that did not exist an hour ago now exists, one that replaces a mother's curse, chasing a son across the world with citizens. Evidence. And a vote. Her bias is real. So is the institution she creates. That is why this ending refuses to be simple. Orestes thanks Athena with everything he has left, promises an alliance between his homeland and hers that will last for generations, and leaves the court a man absolved by law of a crime he never once denied committing. The Furies do not take the verdict quietly. They are the only ones in this entire story who refuse to let Clytemnestra's blood simply be reclassified as a lesser kind of blood. They threaten the city itself, promising to poison its future the way they have always punished the families that wronged their own kin. Athena does not silence them. She makes them an offer instead. Stay here, she says. Be honored, not exiled. Take a new role, guarding this city you almost cursed. And let the people of Athens worship you the way they worship anyone whose anger they would rather befriend than fight. The Furies accept. They are given crimson robes. They are given a new name, no longer Erinyes, the angry ones, but Eumenides, the kindly ones. A procession forms. Torches are lit. The women of Athens, girls and mothers and elders together, lead them down into a shrine built specifically to hold whatever they are now going to become. Something true happens in that procession. The Furies are not destroyed. They are not banished. A city that feared them enough to chase them out of every story before this one has instead built them a home. And that home is real. And the honor offered to them is not pretend. But something else is also true in the very same moment. The name Erinyes, Angry Ones, disappears from the record the instant the torches are lit. And the version of them that gets remembered from here on is the gentler one, the one easier to sing about, the one less likely to make anyone in the audience uncomfortable about what they were actually angry over in the first place. The city sings. The torches are real fire, not the metaphor of a beacon announcing a war won far away, but something closer and warmer light made by a community that has just decided, together, to stop the killing. Athenian women, girls and mothers and grandmothers walking the same procession, lead a chorus of creatures, once feared enough to be chased out of every other story down into a shrine built specifically to hold whatever they are now going to become. The crowd calls out blessings as they go. For one evening, at least. This looks exactly like what a city wants its ending to look like. This part is not fake. Athens does not pretend that nothing happened here. It builds something a court, a ritual, a name change, generous enough to let old fury live inside new walls, specifically because something terrible happened. 3 separate times, in 3 separate generations. And someone, finally, I had to decide where all of that grief was going to live from now on. None of that is small. None of it is an accident, either. But a place built for a feeling is not the same thing as an answer to it. And a new name is not the same thing as being heard. Because somewhere underneath this torchlight, underneath the singing, a sound is still there. If you listen for it, a woman's voice, in a chariot, outside a palace gate, telling a room full of men exactly what was about to happen to them, in words clear enough that no one in this story can later claim they were not warned. In Aeschylus version, Cassandra is not wrong, not once. The tragedy is not that her vision fails. It is that no one with power ever has to answer for ignoring it. No one saves her, not because they do not hear her, because hearing her would have required them to change. Her voice did not stop ringing the day the doors closed on her. It only stopped being something anyone needed to answer. Maybe that is closer to what a civilization actually is, not a place that ends the scream, but a place that finally agrees on where to put it. So the singing can continue around it without anyone having to hear it directly again. None of them needed to believe they were cruel. That is what makes the story harder to leave. Agamemnon had a war he could not walk away from. Clytemnestra had a daughter no one else would mourn. Orestes had a god's command and a mother he met. For the first time, as a verdict before he ever got to meet her as a person. Athena had a city to build, and a peace she needed badly enough to vote for it before she finished weighing it. Every reason was strong enough to stand inside. Every reason was also strong enough to hide the person standing on the other side of it. Somewhere in your own life, there was likely a smaller version of this same certainty, a decision about someone close to you, made with every reason in the world to believe you were right. And maybe being right, in the moment, felt like all the permission you needed. The house in this story never got to ask itself the one question that might have actually stopped the killing 3 generations earlier than it did. Because everyone inside it was always too busy being right to slow down long enough to ask it. It is the only question worth carrying out of this house tonight. Have you ever been so certain you were right that you stopped being able to see the person standing in front of you at all?